Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, a little section which we have on the side lets us understand about CSS grids, because one of the most important things in CSS in fact is layouts, which we have talked about a little bit in Flex. And the second type of layout which we have in CSS is known as CSS grids. Now we'll discuss about grids in general, how to work with them, what kind of applications require you to use grids. But very broadly speaking, there are two main types of layouts which exist in today's time: the grid and the flexbox. We already have discussed about flexbox. For grids, you can think about it in a way where you would need CSS grids when you need the customization on two-dimensional front. When I say 2D, that is two-dimensional, I mean that you want to have precise control over the width and the height attributes of any element in the grid itself. Imagine a grid and see that you can resize basically any element according to what you want. Flexbox, on the other hand, is more like a one-dimensional layout, because the only major thing which you can specify is the direction in flexbox, right? You can specify a flexbox of row or column, and then you can stack multiple flexboxes on top of each other to make it kind of like a grid. But CSS grid starts from the scratch. It assumes nothing like flexbox does, that you have a single direction and so on, and therefore consequently it brings a lot more CSS properties, a lot more things which we can customize. So I'm going to be using this codedamn playground to walk you through the CSS grid generation part, and you will also have labs in here helping you solidify your concepts if you are watching this course on codedamn.com, obviously. So yep, super excited to start the grids part. That is all for the introduction. I'm gonna see you in the next one really soon. Hey everyone, welcome back, and let's just go ahead and begin with a little bit of CSS grids and this, a hands-on implementation. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a div first of all over here. Let's say this is my grid, and I'm gonna have a bunch of squares, let's say 5 divs over here, which includes some class names, right? So we can just say this is class as SQ1, then this could be 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's just give it another one. So we have a grid and we have 6 squares. So I'm gonna say inside of grid, for example, I'm gonna make this display grid first of all. Obviously that means that now we are working with a grid. I'm gonna also give a grid div and background of, let's say, red, width of, let's say, 20 pixels and height of 20 pixels. And I'm just hard coding this for now so that we are able to see at least, or let's just make this 100, right? And you can also do nth child to n as, one second, let's keep it this. Let's give the nth child 2n as the background red, and the 2n plus 1 could be just blue, instead of just writing all the colors and everything, right? So there we go. Now we have a little grid with us. Well, not exactly, but still, let's just see what we can do. So the first property which we should discuss about, and let me just get rid of the h1 also. First property which we can discuss about is the grid template columns and grid template rows. So all of them go on the container element itself, right? So the way this works is that we say that grid template columns, columns, is a property which can include some interesting values, right? So this can include a bunch of different formats of values. So let's say I just start with 100 pixel as 2 values. So you see what will happen when I do something like this. We now get 2 combined rows, right, of 100 pixel. What if I make this 200 and then the second one remains 100? So you see what has happened is that now our grid's first column is 200 pixel and the second column is 100 pixel, right? If I make this 300, then you'll see that we won't have much difference, because the rest of the 300, let's just give this a little background of yellow so that we also see where the grid is. So you see this is the size of our grid, and now if I make this, let's say 150 instead of 200, you will see that this would decrease. The gap between the 2 columns would decrease. Let's just open this in a new tab for a while and open our inspector, right? I'm gonna zoom this a little and the web page as well, and when I go over this, you can see when I go to the grid part, this grid over here. Not sure if you can see these lines, but there's a line of grid showing how the grid is splitted, right? And you can clearly see, if you just pinch the video enough, you'll be able to see that there is a dotted line which ends just over here when I hover over this, and the second dotted line ends just over here, right? And of course this grid is a block element in a way, so it also spans the whole screen, but that's fine. But the grid in itself just exists over here for 2 columns. Now let's say I give this another column of 150 pixels. Then you'll see that now we have 3 columns over here. Let's just reduce this to 200 so that we also stay on the same screen. And now you can see that we have 3 columns now with a single property. And you can see as and when I keep on adding more squares, in fact, we don't even need these classes. That's completely fine. As and when we keep adding more squares, the rows automatically start increasing, right? So this is how, in a very basic sense, you will create a grid with a fixed number of columns, 3 in this case, with fixed number of widths as well, in a way, right? You can see that if I shrink the screen in a way, we have to scroll, right? So it's not like they're decreasing or adapting to the screen size or something like that. It's not happening. So this is like the fixed value, the fixed thing you can specify. There is another interesting unit which you can specify over here, and that is the free size, fraction of the free size in the grid. And what that does is like we would give flex grow of 1 in a way. Similarly, you can specify 1FR, a unit like this. And what this will do is it will make sure that the 2 columns, because this is 1 over here, have the exact same width, right? And if I give this 1FR again, let's say, so now we have 3 columns with exact same width. So if I go ahead and refresh this page in the full window and inspect it in a way, you will be able to see when I click on this grid, hover on this grid, you can see the way this column gets split is this is the full column, the first column, this is the second column, this is the third column. And obviously, because now this depends on the size of the grid, it's also responsive in a way, you know, not fully responsive obviously, because still you can see that if your screen size is smaller than the minimum width of grid itself, it will not be responsive, but at least it's not as rigid as it was before with the pixel values. So that's how, in a nutshell, you can start working with grid template columns, and the more values you give over here, the more number of columns it will start generating, right? So if I have 5 values over here, you can see we have 5 columns now with dynamic number of rows. You can increase them as and when you please, so that's completely up to you, right? So yep, that's how this works in a nutshell. Hopefully you had a slow and steady start with grid. That is all for this video. I'm gonna see you in the next one really soon. Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, let's just go ahead and take a look at grid template rows, how that works with grid template columns. So just like grid template columns allows you to set a specified width to the columns which you have on the screen, you can also do the similar thing with grid template rows over here. So let's say if I remove this and make this only 3 columns, what we can do with rows is that I can say that, okay, I want each and every row to be 150 pixels. The first row at least, not each and every row, to be 150 pixels, right? So this means that the first row will have this size of 150 pixels. Then the next row I want to have as 250 pixels. So I can do that. The third row I want to have as, 320 pixels. Fourth row, 420, and so on. So you can see that every time I'm specifying a value, it increases the size of the row. And you can see that in the created grid as well. When you hover over this, you can see the grid over here, which you can see in the Chrome DevTools. Also, I'm apparently not able to zoom into this, but if you look close enough, you will see the labels: third row with the dotting, second row with the dots, first row with the dots, and so on. So you can see the dimensions over here are the same dimensions which are specified over here. Usually when you're working with simple apps, you could probably just leave it to auto in a way, or maybe, just not bother with this at all, and you can just play with the grid template columns if you want. If you want more advanced layouts, if you want to have specific widths and stuff, heights and stuff for the rows, you can surely opt in for grid template rows. So that's a quick video. That's all we're going to be discussing in this one. We have a lot more to discuss around grid in the coming videos. So let's do that. That is all for this one. I'm going to see you in the next video really soon. Hey everyone, welcome back. Again, a quick little video on functionality which grid layout provides you, and that is the repeat function in CSS. So what this repeat function does is that, let's say if I had these 4 1FRs and then let's say 4 more values, let's say 5 1FRs. So what I can do is, instead of writing this 5 times, I can use a function like repeat, then the number of times I want to repeat a particular value and the value itself. So when I do something like this, when I do something like this, and if I remove this, you're gonna see that we basically got the same result we got by writing 1FR 5 times. But this looks much more cleaner, right? Especially if you have more values and you have more values to repeat after this. So you can use repeat over and over again for your particular use. Again, a quick short video, just not to overwhelm you with a lot of information which will be coming. So that is all for this one. I'm gonna see you in the next video really soon. Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, let's just construct a full grid with a new property, grid template areas in CSS, and see how you can have maximum control over which element is going where, with which column and which row. So this could very well be used to construct a fully blown layout on a website, so that's completely fine. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a little bit of semantic HTML, just that so that it's easier for us to target in CSS without any IDs and classes, and it will just look nice as well. So we have a section with ID grid, which we had earlier also. This header could be just simply saying header, and I'm not gonna do all fancy CSS styling, we'll just keep it simple. Then we can have a main section, which is like main content. And the nice thing about grid is that usually a lot of placement and everything is happening in the CSS world, so you don't need a lot of nesting of elements and, you know, just having elements inside elements. You can keep a lot of things on top and then leave rest of the stuff to grid. Then let's say we have an aside, which is a sidebar, right? And then finally I can say I have a footer like this. Now we have this grid as the section as the grid, so that is done. And we have this grid template columns, repeat 155. So let's remove that. Let's remove this also, and let's just start giving some names to things. So I can say main could have a background of green just to distinguish the boundaries. Aside could have a background of, I don't know, black and color white. We can then have footer as a background of blue and color white again. And then what else is left? We have header, and header could be, you know, just yellow, so that's fine. So header could be yellow. All right, so once we have this out of the way, let's just try to construct different layouts from this sort of thing which we have. And we can also give margin 0, padding 0, just some basic CSS resets, right? So now what you see on the side is the basic layout which we see. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about something known as grid areas. So this grid area over here, this property, would help us give a name to the container itself which we want to place somewhere in the grid. Well, this just means that you have to kind of give a reference to the element. Now, for example, for main, I can say grid area and then specify the name of the area. I can just say main in this case. Now this might be a little confusing, but these two don't have any relation, so you can have this as, you know, main content. That's also fine. I'm just keeping this main because it semantically also means kind of the same thing, main thing, or, you know, you can just name it anything else. Similarly, for grid area for a side, I can say this is sidebar. For grid area of footer, I can name this footer. For grid area of header, I can name this header, right? So now we have named these things, and obviously nothing interesting happens so far. You can see the layout kind of looks a little weird and broken, but that's fine. We'll address what's going on over here soon. So once we give all of these grid areas certain names, what we have got access to is basically the ability to do something with a property known as grid template areas. And what this template areas property does is that this allows you to construct a little grid string within this property, right? So first things first, this is a multi-line property value. This could have multiple lines. So, you can feel free to just give it a couple of enters. And then you have to start writing these grid area values, which we specified over here, in the order in which you want it to appear on the screen. What do I mean by that? Let's just discuss first. So let's say I want these, all of them stacked in a single row, right? Right now you can see the layout is kind of broken. We don't even see half of the elements. That's fine. But let's just start with header. Then I'll have main over here. Then I'll have sidebar. And then finally I'll have footer, right? So I have this thing with me over here. And let's just give it a grid template columns of 1fr. And one final mistake which I did, this in fact is a multi-line string, but you have to enclose the individual values within the quotes themselves, right? So now you can see that I made this as a multi-line string, but that's fine. You can give enters over here, but these things which are in quotes, they have to match with the grid area which you mentioned, right? So in this case, I mentioned grid template columns as 1fr, so that's fine. Let's say if I mention this as 1fr. Now what we have is essentially two columns, but the areas which we have specified is only for a single column, right? This one thing is a single column. So what we can do essentially is that I can write main a couple of times over here, right? So you now see that once I do something like this, again the layout breaks because we don't have the correct representation of the columns and the, this should at least not be an impossible situation. So you cannot have header footer like this and then footer at the end also. So what you can do is just put a dot or a full stop at the end of other things. So what this means, let's explore this a little bit. What this means is that you have grid template columns with two columns defined. You have the area, the chart of the area defined as header and then a full stop. This full stop signifies empty space, blank space, so you don't want anything. In the second row, you said that you want main to span all the two columns, so you wrote main 2 times. Then similarly for sidebar, you wanted a sidebar at the starting and then nothing, and then similar thing for footer. So for footer, if you wanted to have full screen, you will just give it twice. If you wanted sidebar to be on the right side of the empty space, you will do something like this. So you can see you can construct some weird looking layouts like this when you have just these things happening with this grid templates area going on. And because we don't have grid template rows defined, this empty row over here just collapses, right? But if you had something like, let's say, grid template rows going on over here, you can even customize the size of this. So you can give, for example, auto, then let's say I wanted this empty row to be 200 pixel, and then finally the fourth row could also be auto. So you will see that this third row which I have over here now is of size 200 pixel. The moment I remove this or maybe toggle this in a way, you will see my footer becomes 200 pixel, and then this is auto, right? So you see this little area over here is the template, is the blueprint of how your website would look like and how you can customize it. So all you have to do if you want to, let's say, move your, let's say this was your setting, because this is like a more common setting over here, and even if you remove something like this, you have a header, you have a main, then you have a sidebar, then you have some footers, right? You can also have something like a 20 pixel gap over here, then give a dot over here, and then specify header, main dot sidebar, footer. So now you have a nice little gap over here if you wanted to have that. Now, the funny thing about this grid system is that it makes it ridiculously easy for responsive layouts to change a lot, right? So all you have to do, let's say if you wanted to have a different layout, media only screen and maximum width, let's say we wanted to have something very, very different when you are below 500 pixel, all we had to do is just change this definition over here. So let's say under 500 pixel. This means that under 500 pixels, what we want is just 2 columns, not one. Header, or not even 2 columns. Let's just keep it 1 column. Header, main, sidebar, and footer. That's it. So now the moment we go below 500 pixel, you can see that we just stack everything on top, right? Above 500 pixel, we have different stuff. Similarly, you can, just change layouts in a ridiculous fashion with very much speed. You can have sidebar here, main here, then an empty space. You can have different sort of variations, different sort of things going on with you, with not a lot of properties, with not a lot of gears to be tweaked at your end. The important part again is giving these areas a certain name, just designing your grids dimensions in a way, and the blueprint as well with the grid template areas. So you can forget about responsiveness for now. We'll discuss it later down the line also. But yep, that's pretty much it for this video, how the grid templating would work, grid template areas would work in a way. Hopefully you learned something new. That is all for this one. I'm gonna see you in the next video really soon. Hey everyone, welcome back, and in this video let's just look at how you can give gaps between these certain elements. We looked at one way last time, but obviously there could be better ways to do that. So first of all, I'm just gonna pump up the sizes of our elements a little bit so that it's more visible on the screen. So I'm gonna give it a padding of 50 pixel and 0 maybe, I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, that's better. Maybe we can also increase font size a little bit so that it's more visible. All right. So now what we can do in terms of giving gap, you can see currently we don't have any gaps in these grid elements except for this 20 pixel gap, which happens because of this columns, right? So what if I remove this, and what if I remove this dot? You're gonna see now that we have 2 columns and a little bit of broken layout. The funny thing about CSS is that if you have something like this, you will have to go to dev tools and you can click on this to see that this property is invalid, but you strictly would not have errors in consoles and stuff, and that's a little bit problematic with HTML and CSS because you don't have clear errors. So you'll have to be careful. If your layout is broken, for example, something like this is not working, you have to be careful on first of all determining which property has invalid value, which you can do from the dev tools themselves. But how to debug that, you should be able to understand and you should know what the legit values are. In this case, this is invalid because we still have 3 values in footer when we only have 2 columns. So let's just remove that, and you're gonna see that we have a nice layout back. Now we have a property known as column gap in CSS, which, just like the name specifies, allows you to give a column gap. If I give this a 10 pixel, what this means is that every single time there's a split in the column, a split between certain elements, you will have this particular gap within yourself. Now, this is a little bit more generalized version of what we did earlier with a dot, and that dot in fact still is a more customizable and a very fine-tuned version of gap. But a lot of layouts just require you to give simple gaps or simple, spacing between stuff. So if you had something like, let's just say we put another element somewhere. Let's say we have a div, this is an advertisement of some sorts, right? So now we also want to, just background of, I don't know, let's say some color, some light sky blue, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So we give this div or give this advertisement a grid area of ad, and then let's say I want this ad to happen just outside of our main sidebar and ad, right? So now we can have 3 columns, 3 headers, 3 footers, and something like this. So now you see that I don't have to specify the dot twice. If all I wanted to have is a 10 pixel gap between both of them. But if I had to do that without this, then I would have to do something like 1fr, then 10 pixel, then 1fr, then 10 pixel, then add. And now we have kind of like 5 columns going on. So I have to do this 5 times. This is already 5 times, and footer also needs to go 5 times in order to fix the layout. So you see that this code and the earlier code which I showed you is technically the same. It's just that if I already know that I need to give that particular gap, then that is required. But a huge part here is that this code over here is much more customizable. Let's say I do not want a gap between main and a sidebar, then I can do something like this, but not in the other way, not in the other case, right? So that sort of flexibility and customization you can get from grid templates areas. But we have this column gap over here, so we're gonna just stick to that. And we also have something known as, let's see what we are breaking first of all. There we go. So column gap does what I showed you. Similarly, there's a row gap thing which also does what it means, that is the gaps between different rows, right? Similarly, you can specify your row dimensions as well if you want, but that's usually an overkill and usually not required in a layout where you want the content to flow from top to bottom. So that's fine. These two properties can be used together as well in a single shorthand by just saying gap. So when you say gap of 10 pixel, this means row gap and column gap both should be 10 pixels. So this first value over here is row gap. The second value over here is the column gap. So you see 10 pixel 0 results in no gap between columns, but a 10 pixel gap between rows. Similarly, if I bump this to 20 and let's say this is 0, then you're gonna see that we have just this 20 pixel gap over here. So that's pretty handy in terms of, just giving quick values or quick gaps between certain elements if you want. And you can just have a nice little small simple grid very quickly if you just give it a gap of 20 pixels. So that's a shorthand, and that's a property which you should be aware about. So yep, that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully you learned something new. I'm gonna see you in the next one really soon. Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, let's just go ahead and take a look at justify content, justify items, and align items. These are also two important properties, two important CSS properties which you should know and how to work with them. So first property, like we discussed, justify items. Now what this property does is that you can consider this block as the div itself, and the div or this section or main or whatever it is, and the contents inside this as the contents of the grid element itself. And currently, because we have this even padding, that's why this does not seem like it's not in center, but let's just change that a little bit. I'm gonna change this by saying just, let's see, so instead of padding 50, I'm gonna say this, all of them has a height of 100 pixels, right? So now it seems much more clear what the status is, what the story is. So let's say now I want to change the positioning of the elements inside of this grid, right? So I'm gonna just first of all remove the gap property so that we have a more condensed grid with us. And now what we can do is start playing with a property known as justify items. And I'm gonna say this is center, just to give you an idea what this does. So you can see the first thing it did was that it stretched, or compressed rather, all the elements to the center of the screen itself. Now the thing to notice here is that it actually centered the element itself, not just the contents themselves, right? Similarly, for the other axis, you can use align items and then also give it a center. The moment you do that, you're gonna see that nothing happens in this case because we have a fixed height specified with us. But let's just say if we are able to remove this, you'll be able to see, well, again, not much, because our rows, the height of the rows is similar to the grid element itself. So let's just try to do a grid template rows over here also. Let's just give this 200, 200, 200, right? So now you can see that align items center just puts everything in the center. If I give it a different value of align items, let's say end, you're gonna see that we start at the end. I'm not sure if you were able to see the difference between center and end, but center puts the grid. Let's say if I just show you the grid lines over here, if we take a look at grid lines over here, you can see this is the grid which you have. Center does this, end does this. So your contents at the end stick to the end of the grid. Your contents, when you have specified center, sits in the center. Similarly, justify items could have these values: center, start, and end. And of course the stretch one is the one which you get. Line items could also be stretch, so now you finally fill the whole thing. Start gives you at the top, end gives you at the bottom, and so on. So super useful, super handy if you want to place the cells, the elements themselves across, in the center or in whatever place you want. But the common way this is used in a way, let's say you want to center something on the screen, the most common question, and the most hyped up question ever. Let's say we have this hello over here, which I want to center on the screen, and I'm just gonna remove everything for now. So the simple way I can do that is say that grid, which is the parent of this hello, is a flex. I'm gonna say this has align items and not flex, bad muscle memory. This is grid, line items center, justify items, justify items as center, and also make sure to give this a full screen height, right? So the moment you do that, you're gonna see that this guy right here, this hello, becomes centered on the screen. And you can combine both of these properties together also by saying place items to center. And the moment you do that, this is the equivalent of writing those two things together. So in a nutshell, you basically need only 3 lines of code to center anything on the screen. And that's how you center stuff on the screen on a web page in 2022. So that is all for this one. I'm gonna see you in the next video really soon. Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, let's just go ahead and understand about how you can span multiple rows or multiple columns with CSS Grid. So first things first, I'm going to have a CSS Grid on the screen itself. Then I have a div over here. Now, the next thing which we will have is certain styles on this div element itself. But before that, let's just give this grid template columns as 4 columns, or 4 columns is fine, and grid template rows as 4 rows as well. And this is a good time to make use of repeat like this, and similarly for columns also. Okay, so this div over here, let's just give this a little background of black and color white so that it's visible. Now you see that this div is one of the elements in the 4x4 thing which we have on the screen. Now what I can do is I can selectively place this element even without using the grid template areas, using the grid row and the grid column property. So what this grid row means is that I have to give the starting row number. So I'm going to give this a 2 over here. So you see that now this starts with the second row. If I give this 3, you're gonna see this starts with third row. If I give this 4, you see that it starts with the 4th row, right? If you don't give it anything, then of course, depending on how you have specified the other layout, maybe grid template areas, maybe the ordering in your HTML file and so on, the automatic layout system would kind of place it somewhere on the grid. But if you do something like this, you can specify which row and which column you want this element to be. So I want this on the 4th row and 2nd column. So there it is, right? So you can imagine we have a little grid 4x4, and now you can specify where you want this element to particularly to reside on. But the nice thing about this is that you can also specify where it needs to end. So let's say if I have this 3rd row and I want this to end on 4th row. Okay, you see with 4 it did not work, it did not span the 4th row because it already is spanning the row 3 till 4. So if I give this 5, you're gonna see now we get, if I open this in a new tab and if we take a look by clicking on the grid, now you see if I zoom this a little, we have the 1st row, we have the 2nd row, we have this 3rd row and 4th row spanning over here, right? So now you can see it spans from row 3 to row 5. Now similarly, we can do one more thing over here, is that instead of specifying the starting and the ending row, I can give this a span value of 2. So what I'm saying essentially over here is that start on row 3 but span 2 rows. If I start this on row 2 and span 3 rows, you're gonna see our element would obviously, the This is because we don't have any other contents in the grid. That's why it just keeps on collapsing. But if I refresh this over here, you'll be able to see that now we have contents. When I click on toggle on this, now we have the spanning from row 2 to row 5, right? So it spans 3 rows now, which is awesome, right? Similar thing can apply to the grid column. I can say second column but span 3 columns, and there we go. By default it will always span 1 row or 1 column, that is, you know, a single cell, but you can play around with these values. There's an easier way to also give these row numbers, but we'll discuss about that soon. So that is all for this one. I'm gonna see you in the next video really soon. If you're still watching this video, make sure you comment down in the comment section, I watched this video till the end. Also, if you're not part of CodeDamm's Discord community, you're missing out a lot on events which we organize on a weekly basis to code. You already know the drill. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and thank you so much for watching.